welcome to the Ryan Magic Show. Today I'm here with Jeremy Princi, who is my new gut health coach. And I thought, well, it'd be a great way to kickstart the journey to get him onto the show and be able to understand as much as I can extract from his brilliant mind around gut health. So thanks so much for coming on, man.
No worries, and yeah, thanks for reaching out and having us on your show.
Dude, it's an absolute pleasure. Now I know this topic around gut health can be a deep dive, can be a bit of a rabbit hole, and I know that there's so much deep complexity to it. So my intention for this chat is to really go into the theoretical side of it, so people understand what gut health does, the benefits of it, the dangers of not taking it seriously in terms of people's health and well-being, and then also to get as much practical kind of advice as possible around how can someone have the best gut health possible. Um, I'd love to kick off first and foremost with how you would best describe. Um, Actually, you know what I'd love to do? I'd love to get how did gut health for you, like with your own life and your own story, become a priority to the extent that you decided this is a way that I can positively impact the world? Like, what was your background, or did you struggle
Mm.
with gut health? How did you even get into this, man?
Sure, yeah, I'll share a bit of my experience and kind of how I came to be in the position where I am now, which is right into a very I suppose complex clinical setting with it all. So personally, my background is I'm a chiropractor, so I grew up really involved in sports. So I played quite high level footy and cricket, and was always sort of in the mindset that what I wanted to do when I finished my chiropractic degree was become a sports chiro. So I
Mm.
did my basic training, 5 years undergrad chiro, and then an extra 2 years post-grad sports chiro. Part of that was I was very fortunate to go over to the United States and work with the Seattle Mariners, the Major League Baseball team over there, as part of an internship as part of that.
Wow.
And everything was going really well. I thought that was kind of where I was going to head and what I wanted to do. And I sort of, and it was definitely one of the most profound experiences in my life, and had an amazing time. But when I came back, I kind of, I worked in the cricket for a little bit with the whacker, but I was really involved in my own sort of personal training in the physical sense.
Mhm.
And it happened to, and I was sort of really in that world of, I suppose, fell victim a little bit to the marketing of all the bodybuilding supplements and all this and that. Never entered into the anabolic steroid use or anything like that. That just is not in my philosophy and has never resonated. But in the natural world, like with supplements and all the, I suppose, legal natural things, I've always researched and really wanted to get the most out of my own self with my training. And I happened to come across one of Paul Chek's trainers in Perth, and he was a holistic lifestyle coach and a Czech practitioner. And I
Mm.
went along to one of his workshops, and he's just a guy that just really expressed health, like from the physical sense, just looking at him, and just his presence as well. You could just tell internally this guy you know, had things dialed in and was super healthy. And it was challenging being at that night.
How come? Can I ask? Like, what were the symptoms that you saw that just made you feel that this guy was so healthy?
Yeah, so just, well, in his physical body, just his he's very muscular and lean, and but
Mm.
in a very natural way. Like you can see someone on
Right.
anabolic steroids, right? It's kind of that sort of puffy, bulked, rounded look, whereas this guy was just kind of chiseled and very naturally athletic, like what you'd seen in
Mm.
indigenous,
Tribes.
hunter gatherer. Yeah, exactly. It's a very natural, healthy sort of look. Eyes very clear, just his smell, um,
You went up and
and
had a bit of a whiff.
yeah, of course.
Of course, that's what
And
I do when I meet people.
yeah, and uh, what else was there?
His
And
presence,
just yeah, it's
because I
just his
find it
presence.
interesting that Deepak Chopra refers to health just as energy. So he's just
Yep.
he's like, the degree to which you're energized is the degree to which you're healthy. If you're lacking energy and you're tired, you're unhealthy. If you're energized, you're really healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, so his presence and just the way he communicated, and he was just, you could tell he was that he, that things were ticking along really nicely for him,
Mm.
and that, I suppose the point I'm trying to make with the story is his what he taught us and what he shared with us, which was only in a night, was completely against kind of what I'd been doing, from a diet perspective, nutritional perspective. So he was very against any, like, the supplements like protein powders, pre-workouts, post-workouts, all that kind of stuff, which I was, wrapped right in that world and was loving it. And but then I sort of looked at it, I was like, well, he's obviously doing something right. So I'm going to take this on board. So I literally went home that night, threw out all my protein powders, all my,
Wow.
all those potions and, pre-workouts, post-workouts, the whole lot.
Yeah.
And he didn't, and this, I suppose the nutritional side of things that he covered was more just, it was kind of in a paleo kind of template, but really just whole foods at a foundational level. So I kind
For
of,
anyone that doesn't know, like a whole food is like an unprocessed food, right?
pretty much, yeah. I mean, if you go to a grocery store, anything that's on the periphery. So if you ignore everything in the aisles, that's all your packaged processed foods, and you just stick to everything around the perimeter. That's all your fresh foods, fruits, vegetables, all your meats, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So and at the time, I guess what I had probably been struggling with health wise was I had quite a bit of acne on my back, and that'd been going on for quite a while. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it was enough to, as a young man, to be a little bit self-conscious of, I suppose, especially going through chiropractic school, always working on each other and practicing your shirts off and so on. And within about 30 days of just following kind of that model, that just pretty much cleared up completely. It was just all gone. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
And then just basic, just basic joint pain as well. Like I had a bit of a dicky low back, just from chiro school, being over adjusted, and managed to mess up one of my discs a little bit. So that kind of was always sort of lingering around, and every morning I was pretty stiff and sore and that kind of thing. And that all pretty much cleared up as well. And I was, so that was kind of, I suppose, a bit of the background of it. But one of the things that he did cover in that workshop was fermented foods. And having I suppose a science background and a bit of a nerdy sort of personality, that kind of pricked my ears up, because it was, well, this stuff's pretty interesting. You get all these, foods and put them in jars, and, it's a little science experiment, really. So I kind of went deep in that when I got home and was fermenting, and had all these, it was kind of like a science lab in my kitchen for quite a while there. So that was, I suppose, the introduction to gut health for me in that sense, because from there, after a little while of doing that, I was quite interested in, well, what's the actual science behind these fermented foods, and what's involved? Is it just like ancient wisdom, or is there actually something to this in the modern world? So I just literally went into PubMed one day, typed in sauerkraut or fermented foods, and lo and behold, there was quite a lot of research in the microbiology sense of how it all works, and how you actually ferment.
Is PubMed like a website where there's published medical journals?
Exactly, yeah. So PubMed's kind of like the Google, like if you think of like Google's a search engine for the web, PubMed's like a search engine for research papers.
Wow.
And all your peer-reviewed literature, all that kind of stuff. So what I discovered from that was that there's actually correct and optimal fermenting techniques. Like we were just kind of, throwing things in jars with a bit of salt and so on and letting it run. But there can be some dangers that go with that too. We're dealing with bacteria and yeasts and so on, and you want the right kind of things in there. So that kind of, when I realized that, oh shit, there's actually correct scientific ways and protocols you should really be following. I then started teaching fermenting workshops, kind of spreading that information so people would do it correctly. And wrote a book and so on. And from there, that introduction to fermented foods just grew into gut health in general. So I started looking at the research papers into everything gut health, I suppose, and that's basically been me for the last 10 years. it's
Wow.
that's just snowballed from there, and that
Yeah.
led into wanting to know, well, how can we test this in individuals? How can we then make this relatable in a clinical setting? So started running stool tests, and that's kind of been how it came about for me, I suppose, in a long answer.
Mate, it's beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. And one thing that I love about your approach so far, having only just started working together, but going through the pre-work, everything's very holistic. And I find a lot of the time if I get, and this is why I was drawn to work with you, was because of your focus on the greater uh, environment, not just what's going in nutritionally to my body, but all the other environmental factors as well. Because if someone's going so micro, it may not be the whole truth what they're suggesting that I do differently. And so I
Mm.
really, really love that you have that holistic focus. Can you talk to me in a nutshell, like what are the basics behind someone having really a healthy gut health? Like, what are the
Mm.
basics that people need to do to have a healthy gut?
Yeah, sure. Well, we now know it is quite complex, right? And there's still a lot of information coming out. But we know for certain that it's not just food that impacts our gut. It's the water we put in. It's things that you probably wouldn't even think of: electromagnetic radiation, circadian rhythm, the people we hang around. All these factors and all these factors kind of interrelate with gut health and do shape gut microbiome. Like, it's pretty complex, and there's a lot of microbial activity. There's probably around about 5 kilos of bacteria in our gastrointestinal system, so it's quite a lot, and they outnumber
Wow.
us by about a factor of 10 to 1. So for every one human cell, there's about 10 microbial cells, if that makes sense. And in terms
In
of,
in
if
in
you
the in the digestive
just in the
system.
digestive system, that's not even looking at the skin microbiome, the nasal cavities, all all the other components as well, all the other little microbiomes around. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, I mean, if you look at that from a DNA perspective, there's about 100 times more microbial DNA than human DNA. So we know the importance of that from a health perspective. It's well established. There are a lot of different factors. So people kind of think first off food, and yes, that is that's incredibly important. But I do like to kind of take a bit of a bird's eye view and look back on it a bit and look at I suppose more holistic, for lack of a better word, of all the components that can shape the microbiome,
Mm,
and that's health.
mm, beautiful. Thank you for that. So, what would you say are like the different from what you've seen, biggest,
Mm-hmm.
because you've worked with a lot of clients, obviously,
Sure.
the key changes that they've made that have had the biggest difference in the quality of the health of their gut? Like, for example, is there things that you will do with most people? But like, if you're
Mm-hmm.
stressed too much, like stress is like one of the biggest things. So meditation,
Absolutely.
start it, or is there like certain nutritional switches that you will make? More of the general one, because we know the specifics. There's so much
Mm.
variety person to person.
Yep. So the most profound shifts are just basically dialing in the very basic things, really. So when it comes to food, um, which there's nothing fancy about this. People pay me a lot of money to for some of the most simple information, when they could just be doing this and from the start, and you're going to make a big shift anyway. And that, like we said before, whole foods, first and foremost, just cut out all the shit and the rubbish. I guess, at some level we have to live a little bit if that's what people want to do, and deviate a bit from that. That's fine. I'm not going to beat my patients up about that. But for the most part, you just got to make 80% the simple things, like dial those basic food things in. Stick, if you're eating meat, stick to ethically sourced, organic where possible. Same with your produce. We know what pesticides and herbicides and all those things do to the environment, but they also wreck our gut. I mean, like I said, we're 10 times more microbes than we are human. If you're putting in things like glyphosate that messes with the microbiome, that messes with the
So
bacteria.
hang on a second. What is glyphosate?
So it's a type of herbicide. So
Okay.
it's there's a bit of controversy around it, but in my opinion, what we'll find is it'll end up being actually in Europe it's already banned in some places. But my suspicion is it will eventually become banned across the world, and they'll replace it with something else, just like DDT and those nasty chemicals that were legal before and used in agriculture. Yeah. Okay. So within agriculture, because if we backtrack a little bit and look at where all this kind of fits in, the human gut is in some ways analogous to the soil, right? Soil is so important to the environment, and if we keep destructing it the way we are, we've got barely any topsoil left, which is the very top part that's full of bacteria and exactly and that's what creates the nutrients and so on, and then we eventually eat the food from there. But if we keep depleting that with all these, if you're putting in, glyphosate and pesticides and so on, you're going to keep ruining that microbiome in the soil. Okay, and the soils become deficient, and then we're doing that the same with humans, with the overuse of antibiotics and so on, and it's just depleting our microbiome as well. So it's kind of the same sort of theme, really. So circling back to your initial question there. So it's just kind of getting back to the basics with that. Now, the other key things I think that are critically important is proper water. So making sure
before we go to the water and just stick, because this for you is normalized, like it's obvious. You're like, it's common knowledge now that DDT was blah, blah, blah. I don't know anything about DDT. This is, you're a freak in this area. You've done so much research and you've been hitting up PubMed. I never even heard of PubMed.
Sure.
So hang on a sec. So what's an example of what a whole foods diet might look like? Like what might someone have for like breakfast, lunch, dinner? As just examples, just stripping it back to the basics.
Okay. So let's keep it simple.
Yep.
Yeah. So one thing I do find intriguing about humans is we have these, clear 3 distinct meals. We got breakfast, lunch, dinner. We're the only species that do this, right? And I find it quite fascinating. And I'll tell you now, one of the most common things I get with my patients is, well, what do I eat for breakfast? Well, it's like, well, you can just eat the same as what you had for lunch or dinner. We don't have to have this distinct different meal at breakfast, right? Or we don't even necessarily even need to eat breakfast for some people. If we know how beneficial fasting can be in the right setting. So it's it tends to be a sweet thing that people go for breakfast, right? And all your refined grains and wheat bix and cereals and that kind of thing. So I don't sort of subscribe to having to have breakfast different from the other meals. So if you had like a slow cooked casserole or stew or something for dinner, you can have that for breakfast too, right? So whole foods would look something like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, meats, and minimal amounts of the highly refined foods, in particular things like your grains and the obvious is the packaged stuff. Yeah, breads, all that kind of thing. I mean, that's kind of nowadays bread's nothing like it used to be. Good quality sourdough that was fermented properly, right, with the natural yeast and so on. Now they're putting in artificial. Okay, so bread basically used to be and still is, you can still get good, everyone's probably come across good quality sourdough bread. That's traditionally fermented, right? So what in the fermenting process, using the natural yeast and the culture that it has, it breaks down the gluten peptide. So it's generally a lower quantity of gluten in the bread in a good quality sourdough. Wow. And it helps pre-digest it. In the fermenting process. Nowadays, I will just throw in artificial yeast, speed the process up. So, a loaf of bread can be done in an hour or two, or whatever, and pump out mass amounts of it. Whereas your traditional fermented sourdough, it takes time. Okay.
Wow.
You got to allow it to ferment.
Information, by the way. appreciate you sharing this wisdom. I'm just going to keep poking because you know, like every time I poke, I'm getting some gem out of you. That's
Yeah,
cool. I didn't know that.
sure. So yeah, do you want me to elaborate any more on the food side of it there?
Yeah, I would love some other examples of like, so you mentioned just like fruit,
Hmm.
vegetables, meat. So someone could cook like, so meat and three veg kind of thing is
Yeah,
works.
I think so. Yeah, for most people. And then, if we're going to go into the specifics, and this is, in the line of work that I'm doing, where we're running blood tests and so on, and finding out where people fit from a biotype perspective, then you can work out the specifics of, is someone going to thrive better on more of a vegetarian based diet or more of a meat based diet? Like, for instance, to me, I'm a pretty potent undermethylator. I need meat and methionine and all the amino acids that come with meat-based proteins to function well. You put me on a vegetarian diet, and I don't function very well at all. Whereas someone else, it can be the complete opposite, right? But I don't. For the purposes of trying to keep it simple here,
Yeah.
I think just if people just stick to those core basics first, and then I think what humans have done and what we've kind of lost in recent times is a real connection with food
Mm,
and an appreciation of how food makes us feel and function. Basically,
mm.
like it's just people have just become so detached from that. Like it's just this concept of and philosophy now of food is energy. Food,
And
calories
taste,
in,
right?
calories out. Yeah, and with no appreciation and respect for how that food is going to make me feel and function in
Mm.
society.
Would you also say as
So
well that there's like a disconnection from the process of where it came from? Because it's so
100%.
automated, like with Uber Eats, because I was a massive Uber Eater at one point where it's just Uber Eats for every single meal. I was
Yep.
busy entrepreneur. I was completely disconnected from where the food came. I had no idea where the food came from. You know, no,
Yep.
and I was actually dating my ex partner was a cookbook author, and she was massively into whole food and stuff. So she was making all my meals, every meal. I didn't cook for like 3 years. Now that we've broken up, I've started cooking again, and I actually get excited going to the market, being like, oh, maybe I get some parsnip. I haven't had parsnip, roasted parsnip for a while. I get that in, and because I'm more connected to the process of the cooking
Yep.
and the gathering, I feel more like connected to the whole process.
Mm-hmm. I
Mm,
know I would love if more people were to follow suit in that. Now, I appreciate that, things are busy in today's lifestyle. Like, you know, but we've created that. So just where you want your where you want to focus your energies up to each individual person. But personally, I think we need to focus more energy into that whole process. So farmers markets are great. You're taking out the middleman for one. You're connecting with the farmers who created the food and put love and intention into it.
mm,
And then that, I suppose from a metaphysical perspective, if you want to go down that route, has a whole nother element to it together, right?
yeah.
Um, so yeah, just getting getting back in the kitchen and learning to cook and learning where your food came from and eating seasonally. I think all those things are, you know, critically important. And we've lost a lot of that, unfortunately, in recent times.
Mm. And so
Um,
you have you do you like because you get to see this. I know personally when I made a switch in my diet recently off the back end of the support of my ex actually. It was I know I could notice a huge shift in my energy. Okay, because it was a big shift from what I was eating before to after with the whole foods intention and a lot more health like organic fruit and vegetables and good quality organic well sourced meat. And I noticed a big difference. And you would see heaps of people come to you that have I can imagine diets of all sorts, and then you would get them on a whole foods diet. Do you see like just witness people transform with making a shift?
yeah, we see big changes just from people doing that alone without even going into the whole probiotic therapy and herbs and supplements and so on.
Mm,
Just by making shifts in that, then yeah, for sure, see big changes. And the more, I guess, someone has become detached from that process, the more profound those effects you're going to see. Someone who's already dabbling in a little bit of that and sort of got that kind of in check a bit, you're not going to have as much of an effect, and that's where you're going to start. That's where you'll see more. Where you're going to see more differences when you start incorporating some of the finer details which is in line with the kind of work that I'm doing, I suppose, more in a clinical setting.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for sharing all that around the gut health from a nutritional perspective.
Yeah.
You were going to talk about some of the other factors that you notice make a big difference outside nutrition. Could you go into those factors?
Yeah. So the next one I'd say is water. That's really important. So as a bare minimum, at least just filtering your water in some capacity, whatever I suppose fits your budget and so on. I've got my sort of water filter system that I usually recommend with our clients and patients, that we've done the research on, and checks out as a good all-round filtration and remineralization water and so on.
Is that
I think
how much does that set you back?
A basic one is around about $450, and that's kind of
reasonable.
It's a pretty small price to pay for your health. It's a health investment as opposed to an expense in my mind. And ongoing costs with that is pretty mild, really. Replace the filter system every sort of 3 to 6 months, depending on the family size, and that's usually only about $40 to $50. The mineral stones, I think you do them every 5 years from memory, and they're not overly expensive either. So it's not it's pretty mild in my mind.
Yeah.
But also just knowing, if we want to tie it into the gut side of it, we know a lot of organisms, are waterborne, right? So they breed in water, and so if the water's full of pathogenic bacteria, then we're obviously drinking that and then setting up an environment in our gut for all these pathogens as well. And I have seen enough cases now, in my clinical experience, where especially people on rainwater, because it's just sitting dormant and a breeding ground basically. And when we've had their water tested by the authorities, that basically they've been called up and told to turn their water off immediately until they've treated their water. It's been in that high levels of pathogen. The problem then is that runs through the whole family. Like I've seen families of 5 or 6, the larger size families, where the whole family's just been riddled with these pathogens, and then because of their water. So what
is a pathogen?
So pathogens basically things like parasites, opportunistic organisms, things that so there's parasites which, like Giardia, Blastocystis, and so on, that we shouldn't really be in our gut. But then there's opportunistic organisms which are fine in small amounts, but when they overgrow and become more. Sorry, I got my dog here. Decided to wander in. But when we get when they overgrow and they become too there's too many of them in the gut, then they create problems. Okay, they crowd out our good bacteria, which then we're not getting the benefits from our good bacteria and so on. So you can get two sides. You can get things that just shouldn't be in the water and shouldn't be in our gut, but then you've got some of the waterborne organisms that can become opportunistic when they get in the gut and then they overgrow, then they become problematic to us. So things like your Pseudomonas and so on.
And what sort of problems can they cause?
Anywhere along the spectrum, basically. In terms of gut, IBS, so anything from constipation, loose stools, bloating, gas, food sensitivities, immune system dysregulation, skin conditions like hives, histamine issues. There's a lot.
I get a lot of psoriasis. Like I've got pretty bad psoriasis that gets magnified through like sugar or stress.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you think this is something that can be like healed with like working on the gut?
You can certainly see improvements. So psoriasis, you'll see there tends to be relationships with yeast, in particular Candida. So working on the gut and improving that within the gut will have generally beneficial effects on that. Now, any skin skin's an interesting one because skin's kind of your largest detoxifying organ. That's how things come out, essentially. That's why it's, when you have a sauna and so on and you're detoxifying, things come out through the skin. Obviously, we've got our liver and kidneys and so on as well, other methods of getting things out. But so whenever you see skin type issues, going back to my case with the acne, is basically my liver was just burdened with all these things that my body didn't need, like all that extra protein from the protein powders, and which is highly refined, basically whey, which my body doesn't like too much dairy, and all the artificial colors. And I'm sure you've seen some of those pre-workouts and that, right? If you turn the light off, they probably look like they glow in the dark with that artificial. So my liver basically was screaming, essentially, and has to come out somehow. So it was just coming out through my skin. So cleaning up that, then my skin was fine, right? So the point I'm trying to make with that is, whenever you see skin disorders, whether it's hives, psoriasis, eczema, acne, I like to think, well, what's going on internally? Is there some particular toxic overload? Is someone eating things that they shouldn't be? Is there gut pathogens that are laying down biofilm and toxic metabolites, and it's burdening the liver, and then it's coming out through the skin in some manifestation?
So what I'm gathering here is that if someone hasn't been drinking good quality water, eating good quality food as a baseline before we even get into stress and like the whole quantum side of things, with like being around good vibe people and healthy environment and nature and whatnot, just with the food and the water not like being really highly processed and water that hasn't been filtered and treated, that there's a chance that there's going to be pathogens in the gut, which are a bunch of like parasites and whatnot that are toxic and shouldn't be there, and the body is then trying to deal with these foreigners in our body, and it's taking away healthy functioning from other elements of our other organs and other bodily functions that it could otherwise be putting its energy towards, and then that leads to symptoms that are
I think you've hit the nail on the head pretty well there. You've summed it up probably better than I can.
Great. This is great though. This is like, I'm learning so much right here, so I really appreciate all of this. Amazing. So someone comes to you then, and they're in this situation. What other kind of factors would you say outside of those two areas cause and impact someone's low, like unhealthy gut?
Yeah, the biggest one's stress outside of those two, and possibly even more so than both of those. So depending on how you look at it. Now, stress comes in many forms. So we've obviously there's the obvious things with stress, but then there's also, environmental stress, pollution, lots of different things. But internally, I suppose stress is registered the same. So whether it's, stress from unhappy marriage maybe, or financial situation and work situation, and then you got stress from chemicals, poor water, all that kind of stuff as well. Internally, it's the same physiological response. So in other words, stress summates in the body, okay? And probably one of the better analogies that I've kind of heard, which is quite simple to appreciate and understand to explain this, is if you imagine we've all got a backpack on, right? And that's our stress backpack. And we put books in there or rocks or whatever, that weighs us down. So think of all these things that we're putting in the backpack as the stress load. The fancy name for that's the allostatic load. So all these things coming in, all these stresses, environmental stress, marriage, so on, work, whatever it is, toxic relationships, are adding more load to the backpack. And then that weighs us down, and that's makes life not flow so well, right? So the idea is to try and decrease that allostatic load, or that stress load, by taking as many of those factors out of the backpack.
So that allostatic, can you explain that? Is that like an internal?
Exactly. It's an internal. So the internal, the physiological process that goes with stress, like increased cortisol production, downregulation of our immune system, all that kind of stuff, hormonal dysregulation, disruption of the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis, all that kind of thing. Internally, all those different stresses do this pretty much the same thing internally. So if you're skewed with all these physiological stresses from poor eating, um, poor water quality, all that kind of stuff, plus adding in your stress of your just general life and whatever that's going on, it has that summation effect. So it cumulatively adds up in the body and increases that stress load.
Wow. So, uh, when you are stressed, you go into fight or flight, and that
Exactly.
spikes these. What was the word that you used? The L word?
Allostatic load.
Or allostatic?
Yeah.
And so allostatic is the summary of the the more the hormones and what are
Yeah, the whole let's just say the whole cumulative effect of that stress response,
okay, interesting.
which fight or flight's one component of that. It increases adrenaline production and so on, and
Mm,
um, yeah, it's this kind of balancing act when it comes to hormones and stress hormones and so on.
wow. So what sort of things do you prescribe then to people if they come in and they're just like, I've got high levels of stress in my life, and they give you all the factors? You're like, all right, leave your wife,
Yep.
quit your job, move into nature. Like, do you prescribe
I, I,
meditation?
I, I refer out a bit to
Yep.
people who have expertise in certain areas. If the primary or the major, if we look at it from an order of priority, right? What are the main things here that are driving these issues for someone on that stress load? And if they've got all their diet and all that kind of stuff, pretty well, but the other side of it, like their life and that kind of thing, it's not really in my scope of care, my professional expertise to really
Yeah.
dive into that with people. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychotherapist, so
Mm,
I do refer out occasionally if that's where the main, if I'm thinking their main issues are coming from, and then we can co-manage and work holistically together in fine tuning and working with that. Like I can't do it all. It's not my
yeah.
scope of care.
So is essentially what's happening then, the body's being told, hey, there's danger around, like you've got all
Mm-hmm.
these stresses going on, like you need to prioritize putting all
Mm-hmm.
your, instead of functioning on the long-term sustainability of the body, it goes to more of the short-term priorities to get someone firing to be able to run away from danger and stuff like this, or is there more to it as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's try and keep it simple. So that fight or flight response, basically, from an evolutionary perspective or from a primitive neurological perspective, what happens is the body is thinking and tricked and primed into thinking that there's danger. Okay. So in the
Mm,
wild, the fight or flight is the lion hunting us, right?
mm,
What happens in that situation internally? Blood gets diverted away from our organs. I don't need to be digesting my apple I ate this morning if I need to run away from the lion. I need blood into my muscles
mm,
and away from my gut, so I can get the fuck out of there, basically, and
mm,
live, because we all want to live at that fundamental level. So neurologically, um, that stress response is about survival. Now, in the modern world, throwing your stresses of your job and whatever else is going on in life and these other things we've talked about already, it's doing the same thing, right? The body thinks it's needs to run from the lion. So internally, we're having the same physiological response. Blood's getting diverted away from our organs, so digestion shuts down.
mm,
Where population is riddled with digestive disorders out there. So throw in stress. That's definitely one of the big key components of a disrupted gut function. Just from that alone. So then the idea is, like we said, like decreasing that allostatic load as much as we can, as best as we can. We have to have some stress. That's part of life. To have some resiliency, but taking out the factors that don't need to be there and that can be easily kind of manipulated or maneuvered around, so that we can function better. You know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so many of us in society, because of the pressures that are and the expectations that are placed on us from our environment, need to be successful. We have to have the best relationship. Our kids need to be doing well. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then our body
Mm,
doesn't have time to just digest, regulate hormones properly, and just be a high functioning body. So someone's gut might actually be okay. Their diet might be okay, but they don't have the space, the energetic allocation going towards the gut. It's just being put in other priorities around stress.
yeah. So, and with that, I will just say one thing because it's popped into my mind and it's
Yeah,
quite important.
please.
Is when we do eat, what is important is that we mindfully eat. So being present at the moment. So take a moment to just, relax, calm down, forget about the stresses of the day, try and get the
Mm,
nervous system in more of a parasympathetic or calmer response,
yeah.
calmer position, so then we can digest our food properly. Because if you go into the food eating it stressed on the run, it's you're not gonna digest that food very well. Your digestive enzymes aren't going to be functioning properly, so you're not going to break down the food properly,
Wow.
um, and so on. So I think that's something that's simple that I think we all need to really take time. And I do like the concept of having at least one or two shared meals per day, like in your community, whether it's your partner or whatever.
Wow.
If you got that capacity to actually sit down and have a meal with someone, um, and just have a nice, engaging meal, and conversation, and so on. I think that's an important and beneficial strategy that we can implement.
Wow, that is so cool. Like those two. So you're saying, like, let's say two hypotheticals. One person sits just meditated. It's a really
Mm-hmm.
calm state. Then they start eating food. They're present with their food. They're enjoying their food, and they've got one of their best friends they're having a good chat with. And the quality of the vitamins, minerals, resources that are taken from that meal is going to be significantly different than if someone has just like come out of a stressful business meeting, smashes the exact same meal really quickly and goes into another stressful business meeting. That what is going on is going to be completely different.
100%. Yep.
Wow, that's so fascinating. That
So
is
then that
such a
person in the high stress business meetings and so on isn't going to function as best as they can in those business meetings because their neurotransmitter is going to be out of balance and their digestion is going to be off and so on. So they're not going to like
you say
those people.
neurotransmitters. It's like
Yeah,
the
yeah. So your serotonin, dopamine, and histamines, and adrenaline, all that kind of stuff.
Can you explain those? I know it's not exactly what we're focused on, but I know a lot of
it's a
people
it's a
do.
it's a big diversion. Yeah. So neurotransmitter. Most people have heard of serotonin. It's kind of like that happy, feel good neurotransmitter, right? That
Yep.
kind of makes us feel good. Dopamine's more involved with our rewards pathways and pleasure seeking and so on. Within the gut, a lot of that is comes down to gut function. So roughly about 90-95% of our serotonin is actually produced in the gut by the microbes. So,
Oh,
and then it goes up the vagus nerve, acts on the brain. But um, so if your gut function's all off and your microbial balance is all out of whack, then expect disruptions in those neurotransmitters.
whoa. So literally someone's could have poor gut health and the production of serotonin's limited. So that someone could be depressed because their gut health's off.
Mm-hmm. There's yeah. I mean, you have to go on PubMed and type in microbiome and mental health, and you'll see like probably hundreds of thousands of papers. There's a lot.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. But that's such practical, pragmatic advice there. Mindfully eat. So someone can take some deep breaths before eating and then just not
Mm-hmm.
do
So
anything
it's
while they eat.
this whole gut brain axis is bidirectional. So the gut will interact with the brain, and the brain will interact with the gut. So by having a mindful eating practice and so on, and keeping your stress load down, that in turn is working up. Let's say that's looking at the gut, the brain, and
Mm,
that's gonna have its interactions with the gut. And they
mm,
call it the gut is also referred to as a second brain as well. And
mm.
then throw in disruptions in the gut, the second brain, that's going to interfere with our top brain, right? So it's just this constant interplay that's going on.
Yeah, reminds me of like the play that I see in my field where I'm helping people with their mindset in business that if they're not doing well, and they've got low belief and they've got
Mm-hmm.
no results, their motivation drops, their mindset drops. And if their mindset is low, they take less action, they get less results.
Mhm.
and that drops their mindset even more, which means they take even less action, even less results, drops their mindset more, and they can spiral down. But the opposite's true; they can spiral up, and it kind of seems like once someone's got into a good, healthy rhythm of of just a general holistically healthy lifestyle, their gut's functioning better. It's going to make their brain function better, which is going to make it easier to make healthy choices, which is going to make their gut healthier, which is going to make their brain healthier. I can imagine them kind of spiral up.
Perfect
Yeah,
explanation. Yep.
that's really interesting. So, what a beautiful idea is because I live by myself. I eat by myself most of the time. And so I don't
Hmm.
share any meals. I don't share many meals at all with anyone else. So I could easily just say, hey, what do you want to call? How about we have lunch at the same time with a friend and just eat over Zoom or something like that?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of the funny world we live in at the moment, right?
Yeah.
You're in Victoria, aren't you?
We're open. We're open. I
You're
just
open
like
now, yeah.
my close friends don't live like super local. I'm like, so I guess that'd be a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
What's that look for?
No, it's just that whole. It's kind of, yeah. No, it's just people don't really do that much anymore. We kind of catch up for
Yeah,
coffee, but for meals and stuff, it's
it's
not so
beautiful. So nice. I
not it's
really,
not so common.
yeah, I really, really like that. So I would love to hear a little bit more before we start wrapping this up. It's been amazing, like so helpful,
Hmm.
so helpful. What can you tell us a little bit more about the vagus nerve and the relationship between the gut and the brain with gut health?
Yep. So your vagus nerve, it's technically a cranial nerve, so it's based in the, I suppose, in the brain stem, so the more the primitive archaic brain, and travels down and it has its innovation, but it actually innovates the heart, interestingly, but also the I
Innovates.
suppose,
What do you mean by
yeah,
innovates?
innovates. That's just the technical name for supplies the heart, the nerve supply to the heart. So it's part of the nerve supply to the heart, and it's
Wow,
part of the nerve supply to the gut as well. So
wow.
it's a nerve, and that's what carries information. So in the form of neurotransmitters and so on. Um, and you'll how complex, I suppose, do you want this?
If you're happy
It,
for me to dig when you say stuff that I don't know, then please.
um, it, so simply it carries the information, the neurological information from, let's say, gut to brain. Sorry, from, well, both, from brain to gut, gut to brain. In the way, there's also the heart as well. So it has its nerve flow there as well. Um, so I think that's probably technical enough for,
Hmm.
for
So it's essentially just like the value in understanding the vagus nerve is understanding the brain gut connection, essentially.
Mm. Yeah, and you'll see people now talking about the whole gut brain heart connection and so on.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so it carries the information, but you'll see. I mean, there's disorders where if the vagus nerve's disrupted, then it can have some far-reaching problems. So, um, I mean, you even hear things like a hiatus hernia, for instance. So you've got your diaphragm that sits along here,
Hmm.
right? And then you've got a canal, an opening like that. So the esophagus goes through, and then it comes down into the stomach. Okay.
Mm.
So the vagus nerve runs through there as well. So if you get things like physical compression, my headphones kind of look almost exactly how it is. The vagus nerve coming down and through the canal. If you get like a hernia from the stomach where it's coming up like that, it can cause some physical compressions that can mechanically disrupt the vagus nerve and have
Mm.
implications within things like gut motility and so on, and reflux and that. Um,
Wow. It's
and then you've
crazy.
got, yeah.
I was
So
just gonna
there's
say,
lots of, it's
yeah, it's crazy
trying to
how
work.
complex, like you as someone that's a gut health and holistic lifestyle coach, how
Yeah,
extensive all the different areas come together.
yeah.
It's really cool.
And there's ways, I mean, there's certain therapies that people do to actually, for those who have a down-regulated vagus nerve and they're trying to stimulate that, certain things you can do. For instance, the vagus nerve also innervates or supplies nerve function to the palate arch in the back of the throat there. So simply things like singing, gargling, yelling, or that kind of stuff, stimulate what basically recruits those muscles that lift the arch at the back of the throat there, the little thing that dangles there,
Yeah, yeah.
at the back there. So that those arches, that's when you go to the doctor, they look in your mouth and say, they're looking at making sure that rises properly. So they're looking at the function of those arches at the
Exactly
back
that.
of the throat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all those kind of things I just listed there, they stimulate the vagus nerve because you're recruiting the muscles that it supplies. So that's one way of just simply trying to stimulate the nerve in those that where the regulation seems to be shut down. And you see that used as therapies for things like sometimes even constipation and so on, and lots of other different things. But that's
Singing on the toilet, ditch singing in the shower and trade it for singing on the toilet.
in the
Getting rid
car,
of that.
wherever. Yeah.
Awesome. So, quick question before we wrap up on I know that you're really passionate about what's it called when you put it all in the bottles?
Fermenting.
Yeah, fermenting.
Yeah.
So I have sauerkraut, but other than that,
Yeah.
I don't. And I love some pickles and, but I don't really know too much about it. Like, would you give? Is there easy things that people can start to incorporate into their lifestyle at a beginning stage to get benefits from fermented food?
This is an interesting question, and one that's taken a quite a big diversion for me over the years. Now,
Mm,
fermented foods have a lot of bacteria in them, lactobacillus and so on, which most people seem to sort of attribute to having beneficial effects in our gut.
mm,
Um, when I first started doing all this, there wasn't many commercially available brands. Like you had to kind of ferment yourself, basically. So I was teaching a lot of that. Now that that's everywhere, it's had its boom and it's exploded. It's there's lots of different fermented foods out there. What I can say over the years, now that I've been doing this for longer and longer, most patients that I work with, we actually have them abstain from fermented foods for a period of time, because when you look at the gut microbiome, they're not ready to handle the histamine load that comes with that. They tend to be high in histamine, fermented foods, because it's an aged food. And what I tend to see,
histamine?
so histamine, it's actually a neurotransmitter. It's involved in gut function, but also brain function as well. It has interactions with copper and zinc levels. Histamine tends to just have relationships with those, plus estrogen in women. So this is going to get very technical, but I'll try to keep it very simple, just so people can appreciate it.
It, by the way.
So the histamines, if you think of this cup, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you imagine it had all holes in the bottom, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pouring water in, water's coming in, water's coming out, okay? Now let's think of the water as histamine. Histamine's coming in, histamine's coming out. It's getting broken down, degraded, and coming out. Problem is, if histamines are coming in faster than they're coming out, eventually it's going to spill over, and then we start seeing problems with that. Things like your hives, allergies, so on. And it does associate with mental health issues as well, and we see it with depression and anxiety. But certain gut microbes produce histamines. And it tends to be all the pathogens, like the opportunistic organisms, that will produce histamines. But then there's also good beneficial bacteria in our gut that help break down histamines via enzymatic reactions. So what I typically see, this is just as a general, is most of the clients I work with will have dysregulation of this system. They'll have quite a lot of bacteria and organisms that produce too much histamine, not enough the ones that break it down. So when you throw in extra foods and stuff that are high in histamine, so your sauerkrauts, fermented foods, avocado is actually very high, bananas as well, then we typically see problems, whether it's potentially mental health issues, or just gut type symptoms. So I don't generally recommend fermented foods these days. We usually need to do a bit of work with people's gut before we introduce those fermented foods.
That's really good to know. Cool. So everyone can just park that for now. So what's the first step? Because I would love for I'm working with you. I would love for people that are listening to, obviously they'll have all your information and I've got one more question before we wrap it up, but I'm interested to know your perspective, given that the environment and the general lifestyle that people will be living in won't lead to a very healthy gut. Where do you recommend people start? Like if they start working with you, what are you doing when it gets to the more, uh, yeah, practice-based setting? Like, what do you recommend people do to get things back on track?
Um, so just going back to kind of the basics that we said, so that
Yeah.
those simple dietary shifts. Now, with that, if I expand upon that a little bit,
Mm,
trying to trying to create, you're trying to get, as I suppose, a bit of a diversity in your diet as well. So try not to eat the same foods over and over again. So basically, the gut microbiome is going to be shaped by the foods we eat. So if you're eating the same foods, you're going to feed basically the same sets of bacteria, and you're not going to have much of a diverse microbiome, right?
mm,
And we know now from the studies, what seems to be a consistent finding is the greater the diversity in the gut microbiome, okay, generally translates to better health outcomes across the board. So simply put, diversity on the plate equals diversity in the gut,
mm-hmm,
which then generally equates to better health outcomes.
mm,
Now, for some people in the early stages, that might not necessarily be in that one physical plate, having a whole heap of different foods, because their gut might not be able to handle too much different foods and different fibers and so on. So instead of being diversity on the plate, it might just be diversity across different meals. So
mm,
you might just find in that any one meal might only be 2 or 3 different foods to start with, and cooked because they're easy to digest or so on. And then the next meal will be different sets of foods, and kind of going about it more from that angle. But if everything's dialed in, and someone's feeling great and they have digestive problems and that, then sure, put more different foods on your plate and go for it. But in the typical situation where I'm working with people, that's not usually the case. They seek me out for a reason, and that's usually because they're having troubles, and it's usually gut issues. But we see, when with gut issues, you see a higher correlation with other areas as well. Whether that's mental health, hormonal dysregulation, and so on. So it's not just that.
So you mentioned something interesting there, which is like cooking, having cooked foods, slow cooked meats, cooked
Mm-hmm.
veggies, makes it easier to digest. Is that just like a solid rule of thumb for people to, if they want to start improving their gut health, more cooked meals?
If the gut's struggling, and your digestive enzymes aren't working well and so on, then raw foods are going to be a bit harder. There's no doubt about that. They're higher in fiber, then it's not pre-digested. When you cook the food, you're breaking, so let's take the plants, for instance, you're breaking down that cellulose and the fiber, and it's then easier on the digestive system. We don't have to kind of break it down and trying to and make it more easily digestible.
Mm,
That's kind of how that fits in. And then work, and we just try and work people's let's just call it digestive power, trying to increase someone's internal fire and digestive power so they can handle more diverse foods and raw foods if that's the way they want to go, and so on.
yeah, that's so interesting. I've never thought of your gut as and the microbiome as something that needs to be like got you get the foundation right and then start growing its capacity, the diversity of food, and its ability to digest things that take
Mm,
more effort, and you like growing its digestive power. I've never thought of digestion like that. Super interesting. Cool, man.
mm.
And so once someone's got these basics right, they're mindfully eating, they've got good quality water. What was the water filter, by the way, that you'd recommend? What's the name?
Yes, we actually sell it on our website. Now we've got we've got an online health store.
Yeah.
It's the Zazen water filters. We sell them, I think, for about 15% off as a discount. We used to have a
Great.
discount code. Well, we still do have a discount code with them that you can use directly with Zazen, but that only works out to about 10%. So when we have them listed on our website for about 15% off.
Nice.
Plus, I've been sourcing quality supplements and natural products across the globe, basically the best stuff I can find, and we import what we can and use local where we can. But we have a pretty extensive online store of different things if people want to check that out. Little plug for myself there. But
Yeah.
that kind of, when COVID kind of hit, I kind of focused a bit of energy on just ramping that up a little bit more, and as I suppose more of a safety net with if the clinical side of things was going to drop down, which thankfully nothing really happened in the end. But the side effect of that was I pumped up the online store a bit more, so that's kind
Great.
of a bit more, quite comprehensive now.
Yeah, I know a lot because I work with a lot of coaches and help them grow their businesses and whatnot. I know so many amazing practitioners in different areas that have this extensive knowledge around different products that only someone that's an expert in that field would know. So putting it in
Hmm.
one place and just like getting all the hacks is super helpful. So I'll definitely check that out and get one of those water filters. So thank you.
Sure.
Um, and cool. This has been amazing. I've got one more question for you
Yeah.
before we wrap up that I'm
Yeah.
going to ask in a sec. But before I do, where would you recommend that people go to follow your journey, check you out? I would highly. Okay, I'm someone that likes to go deep and get a coach in pretty much every area. And so that's why I'm working with you because I want my gut health to be really awesome. So I'm excited for our coaching
Hmm.
journey together. I'd highly recommend that people check you out and instigate a coaching relationship with you. Where would you like to point people who are interested in that or
Yeah.
would like to
Well,
follow you?
yeah, well, my website's just holisticlifestyler.com, and my social media is the same, holistic lifestyle. So Facebook, you'll find me as holistic lifestyler. Instagram, holistic lifestyle. That's where those two places where I'm most active. Um, and then yeah, the website. I share blog posts. I've got recommended um, recommendation list of things that we kind of recommend and have discount codes for, and we're fortunate enough to have affiliate setups with some of those as well, which it helps because a lot of that takes time when you're putting blog posts and all that kind of thing together and you're recommending products and reviewing things. If it's something that I'm happy to endorse, then I'm more than happy to seek some sort of compensation on that or commission on that. It's not much, but it all adds up and helps kind of spread that ripple effect for passing it on. And generally, any income that I generate from affiliate sales, I just pump back into the online side of things with the store and the website and blog posts and content, I suppose. But my
Great.
time's pretty tight when it comes to things as well, because the clinic side of things is just so flat out. I mean, I'm running quite a decent sized multidisciplinary practice here in the
Mm,
physical sense. I try not, to be honest, try not to do too much of the online consulting.
mm,
I just much prefer one-on-one, and plus, I like the idea of working within my community and the people where I'm sort of based, if that makes sense. But
yeah,
I do
tribe
still
based.
do, yeah. So I still do some online consulting,
Hmm.
but I suppose the other end of it as well is I've kind of tied all this in with the manual therapy as well. Like when I'm doing the online side of things, I can't do any of the gut examination. I can't do any manual therapy around if there's hiatus hernias or gut, or if there's adhesions within the in the gut, and with women with endometriosis and stuff like that. There's a big manual therapy component to that, and so yeah, I do prefer to spend my time in that physical sense in the practice where it's combining all that, and they get in our practice they get the whole complete set. Whereas I'm relying on referring out when I'm doing the online consulting to
Mm,
other practitioners for those other sides of thing, other side of it, I suppose.
yeah. Okay.
But
So
if you want,
you're
I can yeah, carry on.
but you're going to want people to reach out, right? And at least so if people go on Instagram, Facebook, it's holistic
Yes,
lifestyler.
with an
Yeah,
R. Yep.
yeah, yeah, awesome. Um, so yeah, I'd say follow along the journey. If someone feels called to reach out, the least that I know you'd be happy to refer them to someone that you
Yeah.
recommend that's local if you couldn't take them on. But that's
Yeah,
awesome.
and I share a bit of some just general stuff on there, the Instagram stories and Facebook page. So people that are following that, they're going to get some information as well. That doesn't necessarily have to mean they're working in a one-on-one relationship and setting, but they might pick up something from some of the things I share in the journal articles and the papers. They try and anything that I find interesting, I'll share. Like
Awesome.
I can give you a couple of examples now. Have you got time, or are we pushed for time here?
I reckon we go to another question and we can just people just check out all your stuff um,
Sure.
on Instagram. But my final question that I have for you, mate, and everything you've shared so far has been gold. And I appreciate you being so responsive to my digs because I was constantly digging for things that I don't know as like a newbie to this. And I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of people listening would be as well. But my last question is If I was to bring a patient to you and you know nothing about them, you don't know their, you don't know if they're male or female, you don't know whether they've got good gut health, bad gut health, you know nothing about them,
Mm-hmm.
and they were going to give you $1 million to be able to give what you would consider to be the number one most beneficial piece of advice or a tool or a practice or something that they could do
Mm-hmm.
in exchange for that $1 million, because they want to attribute that much value to it.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the most valuable piece of advice that you can give?
No one has ever asked this question before.
It's a tough one.
um, and well, there's just so much. So the
Right.
toughness is in the trying to pick the most important. I really do believe that what we'll talk about when it comes to stress is huge. So
Mm,
if that $1 million could be invested in somehow um,
so it's going
optimizing,
it's
yeah,
the $1 million is going to you, so what would you tell them to do?
ooh. All right. I'd, I'd give them as much information as I can about the whole stress model, like kind of what we talked about there.
Mm,
And I would probably say I highly recommend that you look into the Hoffman process. They run it all around the world. In Australia, it's done in Byron Bay,
mm.
and go and do the retreat at the Hoffman process, and then I would refund them 10, maybe 5 to 10 grand of that $1 million, so they can put towards the course in doing that, including their travel and so on. That's been the most profound experience that I've personally had in terms of self development, pattern breaking down, parental upbringing, all that
Wow.
gory stuff.
Yeah.
It's the most powerful thing that I've done and found in my experience with all the various different things that I've done
Wow.
in getting to the nitty gritty and the core of a lot of that, which has enriched my life and shaped where I've gone much more rapidly than anything else.
Wow.
It's a
How do
week
you
long
spell it?
course, basically.
The Hoffman.
Hoffman, yeah, HOFFMAN
Awesome.
process, yeah.
Oh, the
They're
Hoffman process.
developed by Bob Hoffman, and that was quite a while ago, but they'd run courses everywhere. It's basically a word of mouth referral system. Everyone who goes there goes from because someone's been there and then recommended it to friends. And I've not sent, but I've referred a few patients there
Mm.
because I feel that that's something that they'd really benefit from, and it's been, yeah, basically anyone who does it, it's pretty amazing for sure.
Dude, thank you so much for that, and thank you for coming on today. It's been super fun, and the knowledge you shared, and the knowledge you have, because I can tell that we're just scraping the surface of everything. Is just like boom, there's a rabbit hole behind every answer that you gave that we could have gone deeper on. But
Sure.
I think it was a beautiful balance of depth without confusion. So thanks for jumping on, man. It's been a blast, and it's great getting to connect with you more, man.
No, thank you. It's time, and yeah, if you ever want to delve into anything more, then happy to come on again. If you want to go into some specifics, then just reach out and we'll go for it.
Sounds great, dude.